Hi, everybody. I'm Layla Bonneau, one of the leads for ANC 1A Public Safety Committee. And this is our final meeting for this year, and finishing out my first term as the commissioner for 1A01. So I support constituents that live between 14th and 16th Street Northwest from Ogden to Spring Road. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this work in my second term. And we're really excited to be joined by all of you tonight. So we're just going to do a quick round of introductions. If you can say your name, your affiliation, so that can be an organization that you're with that brings you here tonight, or if you're a neighbor and roughly where you live in the neighborhood, that's great. And then if there's a particular reason or concern that brought you here tonight, we'd love to know that just to support the conversation. So I am going to turn it over to one of our co-leads, Bob, to go next. And I'll just say that I am really excited to continue to follow on the conversation that we had at our broader ANC 1A meeting earlier this month, where we heard from Emily and Emma. And so just excited to continue that conversation as we think about the role of surveillance in our community and some potential advocacy work that this committee could take on. Bob?
Well, yeah, thanks, Layla. My name is Bob Schlehuber. I live at 11th and Lamont. I am a peace builder here based in Washington, D.C., kind of an intersection between artist, organizer, producer. I really love creating different events that bring people together. And to have different cultures come together really is exciting for me. In addition to a few different projects I work on, for the last 3 years while living in Ward 1, I've been organizing around public safety. We first were organizing what was called the NEAR Act Study Group, which brought 30 people together to study the NEAR Act, which was a comprehensive bill passed in 2016 to look at violence as a public health issue, as a public crisis. And that project evolved into the Ward 1 Public Safety Coalition. And so we started with individuals kind of learning more, and we discovered that we needed organizational cross-collaboration within Ward 1, nonprofit, business, government, health, civil society, all working together to address issues of public safety. When the pandemic hit, we took that coalition and we created what we call MAM DC, Mutual Aid Movement DC. Ourselves, along with a lot of other pods, other mutual aid groups, have had to shift a lot of our public safety organizing to do more work around mutual aid and direct crisis support. And so in addition to that, I really thank those of you on the call that I already know that have been here with us. We try to have these monthly conversations that I just want to give a huge thank you to Layla for continuing to drive and be the prime organizer behind the last several months, and to continue to bring us together. So these are really wonderful opportunities for myself to hear from the community, to hear from experts like we will from Emily tonight, which is really exciting, and to chat about these different topics I really care a lot about. So thank you, everyone. It's kind of my longer introduction, but I really look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Bob, do you want to just pick the next person and we can keep introductions going?
Sure. I'll just go on my screen. I have Jason is up next. So can we do name, where we said name, who you are, organization, why you're here, cross streets. Can we do a favorite ice cream flavor as well? I'm just like curious.
I'm going to have to update the instructions in the chat, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. My name is Jason Clark. I'm commissioner right now in 1A12, hoping for re-election. Start with the best thing first. I love chocolate chip cookie dough, my favorite ice cream. Let's see, I'm here because I live at 14th and Girard. I'm here because I really, really want to end violence. That's been particularly focusing on gun violence for me.
Cool, thanks, Jason. I have Rose is next.
I'm Rose Schneider. I'm on the 1400 block of Perry Place, right off of 14th Street. I don't have an official title or organization, except I'm health systems management. I'm an international public health advisor. I have the advantage of my office looking out on the street, so I see a lot of what's going on. And we are dealing with a very active drug dealing directly across the street from me. And we're working with Layla and others to try to get multi-sectoral support for it. And if there's a chance, I'll talk about something I found out today about it that is even more concerning.
Yeah.
I've been here for 32 years, so I've seen a lot of changes in the neighborhood and in DC in general. And I particularly tried to look at strategic issues such as a $56 million excess that we have in the DC budget, and yet poorly funded social service and violence prevention activities support.
Yeah. And what's your favorite, from very serious heavy work to your favorite ice cream?
There is no other flavor but chocolate.
Okay.
Chocolate is the only flavor. Sorry, I thought it was obvious. Chocolate is the only flavor.
All right. Thanks, Rose. I appreciate you always being here with us. Daryl, I have you up next.
Hi, everyone. I love Rocky Road ice cream.
Oh.
And I'm a 20-year resident here. I live at 13th and Irving, a house we informally call the Glow House. Used to host a bunch of events here, but haven't done any of that since COVID. I'm really glad this conversation's happening. I have probably about 12 different cameras on the back and front of my house that go to a local hosted server. I'm very careful not to send the data to the cloud where Amazon or somebody could get to it. And I've gotten pushback. I've gotten in trouble for it a few times. And so just trying to figure out, what is the appropriate role for the cameras that I have, and how can we make them less creepy to people who see them, but also let them do some job, and trying to figure out what that job is. So I know we won't figure it all out tonight, but I look forward to getting started.
And if you guys aren't aware, Emily was joining us tonight, and we'll be talking about community oversight of surveillance. And I think that's a lot of what Daryl was alluding to. If you're regularly joining us and didn't you introduce yourself last, if that's okay, to then jump into your presentation. Emma is up next on my list here.
I'll actually be speaking a little bit with Emily, but my name is
wonderful.
Emma. We can do this and then we'll sort of just
go ahead, sure, yeah.
Favorite ice cream flavor is probably pistachio. I am sort of with the Community Oversight of Surveillance Coalition through Jews United for Justice. I'm more consistently a volunteer with JFJ, if you've heard of them. So that's kind of my main role here tonight, but also, have intended to join these meetings because I'm right at 14th and Columbia, and a lot of the content is quite relevant. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Nadia.
Hi, I'm Nadia Patel. I'm an old lady and my favorite ice cream flavor is butter pecan.
Okay.
I have lived in the neighborhood for about 7 years and for about four years at 14th and Euclid. I saw that this was happening on Nextdoor and I'm just excited to participate. It's my first meeting. Interested to hear what's going on in the neighborhood.
Cool, thank you. And you're gonna meet, I really love these meetings too. There's quite a few different people in this room here that are doing different things within our neighborhood. So it's a really cool meeting point that we have, but just to connect with one another. Each of us kind of have our own projects in addition to this. So thanks for joining us, we really appreciate it. The next person I have is E.W. Steffi. And if you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Okay, let me go to Glenn next, and then EW, Steffi, if you want to just go next, or Layla, sorry.
I was going to say, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, if you're not able to come off mute, that works well too. Hey, Emily.
Cool. And then I have the last person here. Help me with your name, I apologize. Malabek?
Hey, hi everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
My name is
Help me with your
Aiganim.
first.
Aiganim.
Eigenem.
Yeah, I've lived here. I live in Irving and 14th. I've lived there for a year now. And during that time, my boyfriend's car was stolen. Well, not car, it was broken into. That's how I found out about the group and the community group and what's going on. So I'm just interested in figuring out, like, learning what's going on. Thank you.
Cool. What was your favorite ice cream flavor?
I like all kinds.
All right.
That's good.
Thank you.
Satisfied rose and chocolate. Chocolate included, I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And then EW Steffi, maybe you're back with us now. Saw you pop
I think she
off.
introduced herself in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey,
It's,
Emily.
Emily
Oh my
Austin.
goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, I could only imagine. Good luck with the toddler. You'll have to still let us know your favorite ice cream when your hands are at some point hopefully free. So thank you, Emily, for being with us as well. Emily, thank you for reaching out with us and joining us tonight. It's just awesome. So you want to start by just introducing yourself and letting us know a little bit more about who you are, and then I'll hand it back to Layla to get us going.
Sure. Yes. Hi, Emily Paul. I live at 16th and Spring, she, her, and I am here in my capacity. I work at Upturn, which is a nonprofit in DC that works on technology and social justice issues. So we look a lot at technology used in policing and criminal justice. And we also look at technology that affects basically economic justice. So like people's access to benefits, to housing, to jobs. And we try to unpack like what is going on with this technology and how is it kind of intersecting with, often with basically across the board really, with longstanding issues, inequities in terms of people's access to resources, access to safety, well-being, all of that. So yes, and here representing the Community Oversight of Surveillance Coalition, which I guess, are you saying we'll hand it over to Layla before I go into like the presentation?
No, it's up to, we didn't talk about the handoff. So what do you want to go
Well,
ahead, I guess.
I made an important update to my slides that I feel like you will appreciate. So is it okay if I start sharing?
Heck yeah, it is. Thank you.
Okay. This
Cool.
is, so, and I think Daryl just had a question about the organization. So I am part of Upturn. That's the organization where I work. And then Emma and I are both here as members of the Community Oversight of Surveillance Coalition. This is what I added for you all, mint chocolate chip. Honestly, it's hard for me to say that's my favorite. I like a lot of ice creams, but that was the first thing that came to mind. So I'm gonna go with that. Should I just go ahead? Is that okay?
Yeah, is it okay if I drop this ACLUDC.org page of community oversight surveillance?
Yes.
Is there a better
there's
site?
also a site for our coalition. Oh, I
Great.
should type it so that it shows up as a URL, sorry. Nope, that's not working. Okay.
We'll get it. Go ahead, I got it.
So what we're here to talk about today, and since, I mean, I think this can definitely be, people should feel free to jump in and ask questions or make comments throughout. But the things that we're going to cover, so just a little bit about what the coalition is. I want to just talk together about just like what safety means in our community. How do people think about that? Really interested to hear from you all, and already to hear some comments from people about what brought you here, and also what, you know, what you all as ANC members, I guess Layla and Jason, right, are hearing from people. So yeah, and then talk a bit about some of the surveillance technologies that are used in DC, and how a little bit about how those work, and some of the implications or issues around them, and then talk about this legislation that we've been working on, and next steps and ways to get involved either as the ANC 1A or as community members.
That's great.
Cool. And Emma, basically, I guess, do you want to just jump in, like feel free to just jump in and add commentary and stuff. Or when we get to talking about some of the technologies, maybe I can hand it over to you there too.
That sounds good.
Okay, cool.
And then just for everyone, we'll usually go until about 8:15 to try to wrap up around 8:15. And then if people want to ask for more questions at 8:15, if people want to hop off, that's great. And then we'll put a cap at the conversation until 8:30. So that's great. Yep.
Okay. And is this what's on the, like, I mean, I think I was.
Yeah, I think if you want to start us off and get us going, yeah, this will be the bulk of it. And then off of this, I think we can pull a few different threads of where all of us are with our work.
Cool. Sounds good. So the Community Oversight of Surveillance Coalition in DC started last year. And these here are some of the members. So ACLU, the DC chapter of the ACLU is like the main convener of this coalition. Has some other local organizations like BLM DC, Surge DC, Jews United for Justice, which Emma mentioned, being here with HIPS, and then also some national nonprofits that do technology policy work, so like Center for Democracy and Technology, Free Press, and criminal justice work, Brennan Center. So this, oh, I thought I had a different slide next, but we'll get to that later. But just to say, this is an effort that has been happening in many different cities across the US, and laws have been passed in, I think it's 16 jurisdictions now, similar to the one that we're working on, also through similar coalition work. But yeah, the first thing that I did, so that's a brief just intro to the coalition, and I'll talk more specifically about the legislation later. The overarching goal of the coalition, as is in the name, is to create structures, processes that have more community input, transparency, and input into what surveillance technology is used by DC agencies. And so this legislation itself isn't about banning or legislating any particular technologies, but it's about creating a process that requires public hearings, requires council approval, and reporting requirements so that we know what technology they're being used. Because often today we find out in roundabout ways what things are being used and how. But I did just want to talk a little bit about safety, because it's a complicated topic. And I know for me, what motivates me in this work is feeling the possibility and creativity and excitement of thinking about safety in different ways, and the ways that I think surveillance technology, as we see with many different technologies developed often by private companies, can be presented as solutions to these big problems, and they're not necessarily always the actual best solutions to those problems. And they often don't get at a lot of the underlying issues. And Rose, you were already talking about that in terms of budgeting and what kinds of social services we have, and all these things that are much bigger than, do we buy this, CCTV camera or use face recognition or something like that. But I guess if it's okay now, or I would love to just hear from people. And this is my first time at one of these meetings, but I grew up in DC in Ward 3, but I've only lived in Ward 1 for about 9 months or so. So yeah, I would love to just hear what people are thinking about this personally, and hearing about it from other neighbors.
And Emily, to clarify, do you want to hear how people define or think about public safety, or more specifically on this topic of surveillance as it ties to that?
Yeah, good question. I was thinking just public safety in general, because then after this, I'll talk more about surveillance and share some examples and stuff. I realize that's a huge conversation.
It's like, we actually did work on this, and I will pull some language that the committee came up with
Oh, cool.
a while ago. But if somebody else wants to share their personal take on it or reflections, that'd be great.
Yeah, as a member of this community, I feel like I feel safe here. I have a sense of when there isn't safety, and I realize that I have a fairly nuanced understanding of what it means not to be safe. And I'm sure it differs with other neighbors, but there's a sense of talking with people and observing up and down the street to see whether you feel safe. And I certainly feel safe here.
For me, it's a sense of calm really is what safety and I guess you're going to exchange the word peace. As a peace builder, that's kind of my framework. So safety is slightly different, but I think the same component that exists between a state of peace and a state of safety is a calmness. And I just right now thinking about my privileges, I'm a tall white man with one level of safety, and my partner is not those identifiers and their level of safety in comparison. And I think we have a very diverse experience for a lot of different neighbors. And that's from kind of the housed side of things, which then again, what do you feel if you don't have a house is a whole nother experience when it comes to safety and a sense of calmness. So that's the word I kind of sit with when I think of safety in our community.
Does anyone else want to share anything? I realize it's a big question.
Yeah, I guess I'm just interested in more social cohesion. I'm wanting more ways that we can be together as a community and hold accountable is not quite the right word, but to be more supportive. And I think Ward 1, ma'am does a lot. Can is a great start in that realm. But know that we're a pretty unique community in some ways in this, and I think a lot of us could learn better how to do that, or there's better ways to facilitate that. And I think COVID has maybe helped some of it. And I'll just leave it at that. It's another big question.
And for me, I think that it would be nice to be one big family, and to not to go against what Daryl's saying, but COVID, I think, is keeping us more virtual and apart, and people who have technology were able to communicate with others. So I feel like it's hard because you want to know everyone on the block, you want to know everyone on the street. People on the street makes the street safer. And I would love to everyone to be distant cousins and all be related and all just be able to feel comfortable, be able to discuss what we want to discuss in the open, not worry about retaliation. Or I know, again, as a white male, I feel I have quite a bit of privilege, which I feel safer, I think, than other people might feel. But it's unfortunate that we don't have equality, and that even safety is a concern for people, different groups of people.
I just put in the chat and would invite others to take a look at it, but we were able to convene a luncheon at, I guess it was a year ago now. Oh my gosh, 2020 is just the strangest year. But so it was important to have some common understanding when we talk about public safety. So I'll just read it quickly. So we have defined public safety as a state of peace where communal culture and access to resources and spaces needed to feel secure, safe, and whole are centered. Whole in the sense of freedom of movement, freedom of expression, and freedom to live, so long as those expressions do not infringe on others' ability to do so.
That's awesome.
And I know there was a lot of deliberation and brown paper, and Bob was a huge part of that. So I'm sure people have feedback or reactions to that, but this is what the committee came up with a while ago, and we're always open to, we should probably start every meeting like revisiting that definition, and just, yeah, wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I copied that into my little notes doc so I can have it. I really like that. And maybe it was Daryl mentioned mutual aid. Yeah, I've been part of the Ward 1 mutual aid group, and it's been really awesome. And I feel like I've just met neighbors that I probably wouldn't have necessarily met. Like, it's interesting living side by side with people, but still noticing a lot of disconnect by like race and class and language. So yeah, it's been really cool to just feel very, like, I moved here to this apartment in January, and I was like, woo, I'm gonna make friends, I'm gonna build community, and then everything shut down. But honestly, because of mutual aid, I've felt so connected, and like that I have met so many people in my community, or our community. So that's been really awesome. Okay, thank you all. I really appreciated hearing that. So now we go to I was going to say the scary part, but anyway, I'm going to talk about some different technologies that are used, how they're used, at least what we know about how some of them are used. Again, it's often hard to find out how some of these tools are being used, or that they're being used at all, is sometimes not disclosed, which is a huge motivation for this effort of the coalition. But so I'll just start going through this, but if anyone wants to like interrupt with questions or comments or whatever, go for it. This is the main like bulk of the presentation. So I think we're okay for that on timing. So the first thing is just surveillance cameras, which like if you're looking for them, you see them all over. I always notice that like mobile MPD camera that I think is on 16th and Meridian Place maybe, or one of right by Trinity Church. And I mean, it's very obvious that it's there. They're not trying to like be surreptitious about that. So, we see these all over. This article came out like 3 hours ago, actually, which was pretty interesting. So they look at just the placement of CCTV cameras throughout the city in DC and Baltimore. And I have a map here of what they show, where the darker green, the darker green is majority Black neighborhoods, and the black dots are, or sorry, I should actually say non-white, but they like mostly that is Black residents, and the black dots are where there are cameras. So you can see like upper northwest, west, like where I grew up, there's like no cameras except around Georgetown. And so this is just pretty interesting, and that's an interesting article. I can also share these slides after, and I can make sure there are links for things. Okay, cool. So MPD has, this article cited like 260 something cameras, which is like the stationary CCTV and those neighborhood mobile CCTV cameras, but that are like, typically they have a place that they're in. And then Daryl, like you mentioned, although your cameras wouldn't even be part of this because you're not part of the like rebate program, I'm guessing, since you don't have a cloud. Oh, you are, okay. So this was an article from DCist earlier this year that looked at where people are participating in the rebate program. It's by PSA, with police service areas. And the darker blue is, higher concentration of cameras. So there are like about 17,000 cameras via that program. And I didn't have time to really like do this in a super analytical way, but I was just curious about the distribution of the private cameras and the distribution of the CCTV cameras, and like being curious, like our neighborhoods, because this is a choice, at least by the people getting the cameras, although it may not be a choice by their neighbors. But I think this is really interesting because even areas that maybe would push back if there was a big like MPD, we're going to install a bunch of cameras when it's through this program. And I don't know, Daryl, maybe we can talk about this more. I would love to hear like more about your thoughts about all of this. And in DC, you're not, when you participate in the program, MPD doesn't automatically have access to your footage. You have to still, you're registered and they can reach out to you and ask, you know, can we see your footage from X date because something happened? Some cities, I think it's just like they have access. Basically, they have your like camera. So anyway, so there are a lot of cameras in DC. And there are also cameras on police. So this is interesting because body-worn cameras, you know, are often put forward as a way to address police brutality and improve police relations with the community. I don't know if you all saw, but the lab at DC did a study a couple of years ago. It was a randomized control trial, and they looked at the impact of body-worn cameras, and they basically found no impact in terms of use of force, complaints. So I think at Upturn, we definitely have the view that police body-worn cameras seem potentially like a sort of like tech solution that doesn't necessarily get at a lot of the underlying issues, and also ends up being a camera that is not recording the officer, but that is recording the people that the officer encounters, and is like potentially another source of surveillance as well. And thinking about just like where there are more police and who is interacting with police more, there's kind of this like just concentration of these multiple sources of potentially being recorded going about your day. And then, so we have all these cameras, and then we also have face recognition to use camera footage to identify people. And when we spoke at the meeting last week, I told that story of Robert Williams, the man in Detroit, who was one of the first people where it was documented that he was falsely arrested using face recognition. In that case, the detectives just straight up said to him like, oh, the computer got it wrong, when he pointed out it wasn't him in the picture. Often people don't know that face recognition was part of, you know, building a case against them or part of an investigation. But MPD does use face recognition for investigation. I don't know if, or anyone else on the call, I don't think there's been any documented evidence of them using it like real-time face recognition where they're monitoring like a crowd or something like that. But that is something that is happening, I believe, in Detroit and Chicago. And so that's one of those questions, right? It's like, okay, this technology is available. How is it being used? And are there ways that, do we not want it to use at all? Do we only want it to be used in certain circumstances? Like, these are questions that we on the coalition think the community should have more input in. And there was a study a couple years ago from Georgetown University Center for Law and Technology. Maybe some people saw it. 2 studies actually, and they're really thorough. In that study, they called it perpetual lineup because 1 in 2 American adults are in databases that are used to search for face recognition matches because of data sharing agreements between DMVs and law enforcement. So essentially, yeah, it's a very pervasive tool, both like out in the world in terms of talking about how there are thousands of cameras that are collecting footage, and then talking about who might be identified using this technology and potentially wrongfully identified, which is the next thing. As I think there has been a lot of like conversation about this recently, especially just that these technologies, or face recognition in particular, has been demonstrated repeatedly to basically work the best for white men and work the worst for Black women, Black men, people of color in general, and women, as well as actually younger and older people. That was all found in this study from the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and in other studies too. And then that gets back to the story of Robert Williams in Detroit, where and the Georgetown study was interesting because they also talked about practices of use. So like they documented some pretty ridiculous things, like NYPD photoshopping a closed mouth onto someone because their mouth was open in a picture, and face recognition doesn't work well if you have your mouth open. So they just picked a random mouth. And then they also did this thing where they said, hey, that guy looks like, oh my God, I'm forgetting, a certain actor. And then they just ran a photo of that actor through their face recognition software, not even the actual person in the footage. So those are things where it's like, what are your policies? You know, what kind of oversight is there over how these tools are being used? In my view, I think face recognition, like, there are so many reasons not to use it, that it's not just a matter of like these egregious little like examples of misuses, although those are very egregious. Another one you might be familiar with is automated license plate readers. So, I mean, these have, you know, like the pretty practical use of like red light cameras or speeding cameras. I know there's been some controversy, I think, in DC around like speed traps, and like there's also complaints around that. But I think like this to me is an example where it matters a lot how it's being used and where it's being used. There was an article, this was a while ago, this was in 2013, just that looked at that MPD was scanning hundreds of millions of license plates a year, that the like permitted uses for that, you know, was traffic violations, but also included things like monitoring suspicious activity and whereabouts, where you start to see it's not just, oh, you ran this red light and we took a one-time picture. It's like piecing together your movements around the city using like a network of these license plate readers. There actually was just a report released in September of this year from the Police Complaints Board about ALPR, MPD's ALPR use. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know that until earlier today, so I have not read the entire thing, but they were raising questions about like transparency of data sources, because police also buy license plate data from private companies, and also about just privacy concerns around how is this data stored, how long is it stored for, what uses are like permissible for using it, or for combining, you know, data from multiple of these to like track someone's movements. Emma, sorry, I've been really going, and I didn't hand it over to you. Do you want to talk about cell site simulators?
Sure, yeah. And then I was gonna, I don't know how many other, actually.
This is the last one. This is the last one.
I can just
Yeah.
jump in with a quick comment as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, another technology that is in use by MPD and other DC agencies are stingrays, or they're actually cell site simulators or IMS eye catchers, and they basically mimic the cell phone tower signals. So it tricks phones to transmitting locations and other identifying information, usually used to track like a suspect's cell phone, but it can also gather information about a lot of other phones that are nearby. So I think it's another instance of, I think if we were all watching this on CSI, we'd be fairly well convinced that it was like a great and very specific science-based tool to find, to accurately find suspects. But there, again, it's just not a lot of transparency about how these technologies are used and how the data is gathered, and also like how it's retained. In as much as, you know, balancing needing to catch criminals is great. It's also, I think, with many of these, a question of also how much it infringes upon privacy, for, you know, any number of, you know, either collecting your face or just your mouth or your cell phone information can be a problem.
Yeah, and then I just threw in here an article. This is from a couple of years ago about DC's stingrays, which also this might be a question that comes up because obviously in DC we have a lot of federal agencies that are using these tools as well as local. But this summer, I don't know if you all were aware, but Councilmember Grasso introduced an amendment banning cell site simulators in the police, wait, now I'm getting confused, in the budget hearings. And it was kind of a quick, we were working with his office on it, and but it got support from 5 members of the council without having been able to have like many conversations with people. So we actually felt pretty optimistic about that. And that there are other ways if you really need to like targetedly get a warrant and track down some kind of information from like a cell phone provider, and that this is, as Emma was saying, just like a completely not targeted, any cell phone in the area will connect with this tool. Okay, that's what I got on surveillance technology. And the last part is just like briefly about the legislation, but I think we could just stop here and hear any questions, comments. And I know this has been already at least 15 minutes, so.
Great, that was wonderful. I think Jason just dropped a question in the chat.
Oh.
Does 5G cell towers on the street pose any specific risk? And I believe this is what Daryl and I were talking about. There's one outside Daryl's home, and there's one on my block near 11th and 13th in Lamont. Newly installed light posts, and I believe what is Jason maybe is confirming is there's 5G cell towers on them.
Yeah, I'm thinking that this brings it closer to, it may be easier to triangulate a signal.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, my immediate response would be that in a way, if you have a really close cell tower, you might be better off because your phone will connect to that instead of the Stingray. Because the way the Stingray works is like drive by and your phone will be like, that's the closest cell tower. But Emma, maybe you have some thoughts. That's not an informed opinion.
So, I mean, I would say that this is an instance, right, where having a little bit of additional transparency on like how law enforcement is accessing some of these things would be helpful, because I think it's true, sure, like having a cell tower that's close by probably means that your device is going to access that more quickly. It also depends on what kind of updated technology actually law enforcement has. Whatever they're using probably also has to be 5G compatible. It's not, I think one of the many items I think that we have looked at in the course of this coalition is just understanding what are the acquisitions that MPD and other agencies are making. We obviously can't get transparency into what federal agencies are making a lot of the time, but at least understanding what are the acquisitions and what are like the capabilities, and having that sort of be just more publicly available and more of a public discussion, because that would, I think, help with answering this question.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask kind of an inverse question a little bit. Is there surveillance for good? Or is there something that we could take from all of this and do a public benefit?
Yeah, I'd love to hear answers and share in that perspective, because as somebody who's a fan of some version of surveillance, I'd like to think there was. I personally hope to get to know my neighbors better, perhaps through the surveillance that I do, if that's possible. You know, I think we all have an interest in knowing people and knowing who's a part of our community, and you know, I'd like to think that we can help people that need it, or support people, or at least remember them. And I can say this happens. I can be looking and saying, oh, look, there's a neighbor, oh, there's a friend, oh, whatever else, and have a good heart about it. I would hope, you know, it's up to them to decide. But and then how do I communicate that? And then how do I also receive feedback and or build trust? Because, you know, cameras don't have that two-way communication really. The analogy I've made, and I'll stop after this, is, you know, there's a big problem with surveillance capitalism. And Shoshana Zuboff talks a lot about this, and other people. But what if we had, I'll just say it, what if we had some sort of surveillance socialism, or whatever you want to call it, where we really were watching the watchmen and able to also get to a place where we're going to see stuff we didn't think about, and we're going to see stuff that disturbs us, and we're going to see stuff that blows our mind, and like get to a place where we get out of that judgmental place, or we know that that's going to happen at first, and then let go of it, and stay more open-minded.
So, yeah, I mean, I think Daryl, and I'll respond quickly, and then Emily, I'm sure, has more to say on this. But I think you raised a couple of good points about like trust, and I think you said consent also. And again, the focus of the coalition is looking at, right, like community oversight and surveillance. It's I think some of the problems that we are identifying are really key to how law enforcement uses surveillance. In general, there are a lot of cases, I think, where it's not being used in a terribly good faith way. And the fact that it's so unclear and generally not available to the public to understand what those uses are is the inherent problem, because there's not trust for a large number of people. And like, if you can't be informed about how you're being surveilled, you can't really consent then. So I think that's like one key part. To the question of whether there's like good surveillance, I think like there can be at least good sort of data gathering that can be done for public good. I mean, we have all heard about smart cities, and there are a lot of issues that, like, I think everything that we're talking about in this presentation is also key to what a good conversation around smart cities is like, where it would be great to have infrastructure in one way that's like very interconnected to provide social services where they need to be provided, or common goods and so on. But it also needs to be countered with, how do we protect people's privacy? How do we like ensure that people approve of it, have oversight over what's happening in those systems? So anyway, that's sort of my brief spiel on that. And I think also, you know, as we transition into more of this type of infrastructure, like we need to have that, we need to consider both sides of that.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Emily, yeah, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good point. Actually, I hadn't really thought about like, this is also building our muscle and ability to have these conversations, like for smart cities, for these other things that are going to, the more we can build our like community ability, what does it look like to talk about these tools and their trade-offs together? But that's going to just only be more and more necessary if we don't want to be in Minority Report. Although I really need to rewatch that movie because I haven't seen it since I started working in technology. But to Jason's point about like, it depends on who has the data and their intent. I think, yeah, it is so much about power and power dynamics, and surveillance is typically about power over, where like some entity is watching you and also able to kind of take action based on what they're watching, like arrest you, like call the police on you, arrest you, take something away from you. In public benefits, which I work on, there's a lot of like monitoring for fraud. And of course we don't want fraud, but often people who are not fraudulently claiming benefits get caught up in that same kind of surveillance of like, we saw you had this deposit in your bank account, so we're taking your benefits away. Turned out it was actually their Social Security benefit deposit that came, like the dates were wrong in the system. So anyway, just to say, I think that there is so much about power that it's a little hard for me to think about surveillance for good. But I think to Emma's point, like data gathering and using data, sure. And I think, yeah, like relationships and trust are so important. I think there's some ways that technology can facilitate that, but I think a lot of these technologies, they're also not really about that. It's different to like be like, oh, we're using Zoom to build relationships, or even social media for all its flaws. That's really different. Like these surveillance tools are not designed to build relationships. That's not.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop in another great film documentary called "Do Not Resist," which was really illuminating for me. It's a documentary that, as you can see, looks at how surveillance plays a role in the larger efforts to oppress and to discriminate against populations. And it shows how it's just one part of a larger web of tools people use. But it's really scary. And just right now, the ways in which the police in Washington, D.C. are escalating violence, I believe, having been out in the streets, and the way surveillance is used in street protests against protesters is really quite scary. There's a chilling effect, I think, to it. And so I'm really thankful that you all are organizing around this. How can we? Yeah,
I'd like to ask a question about how does this research that you're doing and the work advocacy that you're doing, how does it fit into the larger major issue of the overwhelming militarization of the police force and the funding of the police? I mean, we had a discussion, and supposedly there's a major issue. I think, you know, this big task force that's looking at the police. And this is just one of the examples of how the police have definitely overreached. So how does this effort that you're doing fit into the major effort that we should be doing at this time to reduce the funding to police and move it into social and other services? If it's just because this is very attractive to, you know, one segment of the population. But to me, if we spend a lot of time on this, how would it contribute to the bigger issue of reducing the effect of police on our lives and get services?
It's such a good question. And to be very honest, our coalition, there's a lot of different views about what people want to see with the police in terms of people who, you know, don't really, well, I'd say everyone feels that there's some things that need to change, but in terms of like wanting to replace police entirely with other forms of support and response, people who want to cut the police budget and introduce reforms, but are not, but are overall like supportive of policing continuing. So as a coalition, we're coming together around the fact that we can all agree that we need this transparency, we need these community conversations about surveillance, but we haven't actually all answered that question in the same way. I can say for me, because I personally really support the efforts to defund the police and really hope to envision a world in which like we have social services, we have other kind of responses, we have relationships, and we don't need police. So for me, I see this as connecting in the sense that these tools are part of policing. So they're like part of the power and violence and harms of policing. And also that they often get held up as solutions, like especially things like body cams where people want to reach for a tech solution to a bigger problem. And I think I definitely see my work as trying to like kind of take away that magic of technology that it claims to solve problems that it doesn't. So it's a really good question, Rose, and honestly, not one that's entirely answered in the commission and a coalition. And I agree that I wouldn't want the focus to be all on technology or as if that's the whole problem, because it's certainly not. I think this is one form of policing that people encounter and that affects people and that harms people, that is part of like this bigger picture.
Okay.
And I don't know if Emma, if you have other thoughts that you want to add to that.
I think that you captured everything around the coalition really well, and I also align with your personal views. I think one thing that I would say too is this comes at an interesting time where both I think some of the emergency bills and then the last Judiciary Committee hearing from like mid-October like started to address body cameras and started to have just like initial standards for how those are supposed to be used, and it's not enough. So I think this is kind of, again, getting to some facets of what's wrong with policing, but also I think Bob mentioned the NEAR Act earlier at the beginning of the meeting, and this, I think a lot of what we're pushing for, what we're looking at is very much related to what the NEAR Act is supposed to achieve, what all the work is going towards in terms of getting community involvement. And I think, yeah, the point of us coming to ANC meetings and talking with all of you is really to continue to at least spread the awareness of the issue. And I think it's coming at a good time where we're also knowing that I mean, and part of the community oversight too would be to maybe like reduce the amount of tech that we're getting to police departments, which, you know, in doing so also reduces funding. I'm not sure actually what they spend in millions of dollars out of their budget on stuff like this, but I think it's not out of the blue to say it should probably be a lot smaller.
Bob, I don't know if you were about to ask this, but the only other thing that we had in this presentation was just to say a brief word about the legislation and also see what you all think about potentially like if an ANC resolution. That's one thing that we've been talking about in the coalition is seeing if different ANCs would want to pass a resolution, you know, saying to council that this is something that is important, that they should hold a hearing on, that they should consider legislation on. Were you going to ask about something about like next steps?
It's exactly what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Great. It is a great question I just had. Go ahead.
Okay, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning and I'll share the slides. This is where similar legislation has already passed across the country. And I mentioned this already pretty much at the beginning, that it's about creating a process that includes public hearing, council vote on acquiring surveillance technology or on changing how they're using it, and also requires annual reporting on how the technology is being used and on impacts. So part of it is an impact report and a use policy. Those are the things that they have to do. So we're hoping that there will be a hearing on this. And we have been talking with Councilmember Allen's office, and they are, I think, interested, but haven't really prioritized it, at least this year. Pushing for legislation, which we have draft legislation that we've been talking with Councilmember Grasso about, but obviously he's soon to be not on the council. And then, yeah, I would love to hear, I don't know about the resolution process in ANCs or anything, but I would love to hear about that. And then also we do have a community petition for anyone who wants to sign on that as an individual or an organization. There's a link, this takecontroldc.org/act. And then also we have a town hall on December 9th, if anyone wants to join for that. Now I'm really done and I would love to hear your.
Have you done any idea of the budget that they spend on these technologies? Because I think that's one way of getting to, you know, we don't have money for other services. Well, that's because we spend it on technology. You know, is there data that you have or can get?
There definitely is some data we can get. I will say that I'm a little cautious about that route because I think sometimes they do spend significant money, but other times some of these companies give their technology for free to law enforcement. And so money is a piece of it, but it's not necessarily the whole thing. But there definitely is some research, and I'd be happy to try to share what we do have in the coalition about what's being spent today.
I think that might help, and say, you know, that could be used in other ways. I think people in general would object to the police using these technologies, but they might also object to this explanation that we have 3 social workers for the entire DC area because we spent X amount on cameras.
Yeah,
that might.
There's like a nefarious twist to it, Rose. If you watch that documentary, but there's companies like Palantir who will say, "Go out, we'll give you all this stuff for free. We'll teach you how to use it. Just let us grab the data when you're done, and we'll call it even." So there is no like large payment that we can target because these corporations are actually profiting off of it. So part of it's not only targeting our government, but also I think the relationships and the corporations they work with who are driving a lot of this process.
Well. What can we find out about them? I mean, I don't think people would like that either, would they?
No.
Right.
You know, if we found out that Big Brother was actually over the police, that might stir people up a bit more too. I'm not as grounded in the issue as you all are, but I just find that, you know, the militarization and the amount of budget that goes into the police is just unspeakable.
Mhm.
I think it's hard too, and I feel for people like Daryl who also do a lot of organizing in the community. I mean, it's like we need to respond not only with, I guess, fighting back against this stuff, but creating our own. And the importance of like Jane Jacobs' eyes on the street, of us seeing each other, knowing each other, saying hi to each other. That is also one of the best ways to counter kind of this stuff, as opposed to necessarily fighting fire with fire. But how do we create this alternative? And it's hard in Ward 1. The way in which our houses are constructed, they're not constructed to have a social kind of ethos. They're all, I guess, your yard's on your roof and you're behind several doors before you can get to somebody's front door. It's very hard to meet people, and we're shutting ourselves off, which I think allows for these kind of surveillance and privatization movements to take place. So that's like another, I feel like for me, it's another challenge, especially in the age of COVID.
Yeah, I was amazed. I did find one cul-de-sac in DC up George Avenue a ways. I was like, wow, what a concept. What if instead of blocks we had cul-de-sacs in each block instead of alleys?
Well, that's why Prairie Place is such a great spot, because people are back and forth. You can see most of your neighbors in the course of a weekend going back and forth to 14th Street to the stores. But we need, perhaps we can do a better job of showing what other alternatives are there to calling the police. And I'm sure it's been talked about to death, but we have an incident right now where we want to call the police all the time because there's just this active issue.
Well, yeah, where's the social workers to call instead? Where's
they work 9 to 5.
Yeah, right, for now, until we change that.
Yeah, there's an interesting pilot program in a couple cities, and I just saw, I think a week ago, it's starting in New York, where they have mental health providers teaming up with like EMS firefighters to, when like certain emergency calls are going out, as long as there isn't a weapon present or like suspicion of violence. So they're going to try this pilot program. So I'm very curious to kind of see how that goes, and love to see something like that in DC. I know this group has had larger conversations about just like the lack of infrastructure we have right now to support something like that. Emily and Emma, this has been so great and just like lots to think about. We actually had another commissioner join us on the line, Christine Miller, thanks for joining. And then a commissioner not from 1A, but Chander, thanks for joining. We are wrapping up our conversation here, but if I can do a little connecting, Emma and Emily, if you haven't worked with Chander yet, he's been working across the city with all ANC commissioners, especially during COVID, on you know, what we're seeing as some of our greatest needs and how we can work better across commissions instead of in our respective silos. So Chander, not to put you on the spot there, but if there's anything you would want to add, we've just been having a fascinating conversation about the role of surveillance, how we define safety, how those two intersect. And Emily and Emma are from the Community Oversight of Surveillance Coalition. So great, Chander dropped his contact there.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, great. I will follow. Yeah, we'll follow up with you.
It's like you knew I was talking about you, Chander. I was literally just thinking like, oh, you know who'd be a great person for them to connect with?
That's very kind of you. And I'm very interested in this.
Emma and Emily, I did want to offer my support in advancing ANC resolution on this work. We had one we did a few years ago, me speaking as the community, on a NEAR Act resolution. And it was great. It was a great way to meet our ANC 1A commissioners. It was great to go and door knock with and share with our neighbors to get support. And so it served as a really great vehicle to educate and to organize some people. So you already have a few people on the call, and then the chair at least until the end of the year, is Kent Bass, who's also on the Police Reform Commission. And so hopefully we would find solidarity with him as well. So if you want to follow up and let me know how we can move that forward, and I can surely follow up on my end as well.
And if you
Great.
have the link to the individual sign-on, I forgot what it's called, the community.
The petition, yeah.
Yeah, if you have maybe a paragraph that explains that, it might be
Sure.
a good thing for us to spread around in this neighborhood.
Okay.
Be
Yeah.
glad to help with that.
Thank you so much.
Rose, did you see the link in the chat there from Emily? When you go to that site, it has a nice description of like what they're asking for and calling
Okay.
for.
No, I have to say that I didn't. It's
I'm
in there
happy to
already.
also, if it's easier to like send you an email that you can just forward along, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, sorry, I'm wasn't on top of the chat.
It's okay.
I just
Yeah,
see
that's
Emily.
fine.
Emily, you've been here with us. I was just like, make sure Emily wants to say anything, but Emily's hopefully still dealing with her toddler, I guess. Cute. Cool.
I've
Okay,
been in and
great.
out, but I've been listening. This is
Okay.
great. Thank you.
All right, great. I just want to make sure you had an opportunity to say anything if you wanted to.
I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm curious, have you all seen that resource that I think it's Surge DC or put together that's like alternatives to calling the police? Okay. Is that
Yeah.
something that you feel like people in our neighborhood are like ANC are aware of?
The list itself needs to be dramatically updated. Most of those
Okay.
numbers are bad. Yes, that's a huge project that can be done. My best advice that I've seen stay is like refrigerator magnets with resources. And if you want to talk more about that, I've kind of hit my head against the wall looking for partners on that. Of just somebody it's like $500. You can buy like thousands of refrigerator magnets, and then
I'm
figuring out
interested.
what. Yeah, and it's just like it's hard because you have all the mutual aid numbers. There's just a lot of different numbers and how to think about where to direct resources. The largest problem overwhelmingly is the city just doesn't have. There's no phone numbers but police at some point on a lot of these different issues. So we can make this like call these other numbers, but at the end of the day, so much of it goes back to the police. Is a struggle. And there was a stat I wanted to share with people that I thought was astonishing, but it said that 77% of Metropolitan Police Department officers had not gone through mental health crisis training. And so the vast majority of these officers, it wasn't even like we're pretending that they go for like a weekend seminar and hang out. Like they have no training in this stuff. And I just thought about the importance of neighbors like all of you having to be frontline responders. And Rose, you're in that kind of situation. You're like a frontline worker now as just a neighbor because the system is not addressing it otherwise. And that's a big ask of people. So yeah, thanks for stepping up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, Layla, you're muted. I don't know if you're talking to us.
Thanks. I managed to double mute myself. I was going to say, I think a question I'd like to follow up with you on that I get a lot is like, should I get a security camera or not? Should I register in the city's rebate program or not? And I think in terms of like, oh, I get a lot of stuff delivered. It's great to like confirm they made it or who's at my door dropping those things off versus like what is actually being monitored or used or stored or given to NPD or, you know. So if we can follow up on that, if those are some conversations you all have had as a coalition, because I do think the different types of technology you shared are different, right? Like there's different cases and uses for what you've outlined, which has given me a lot to think about.
So if away from my building, we did the rebate program, but I like it because they don't have access to the camera. So someone can say, hey, do you have any footage from this date? And I can say yes or no. Right, they don't make it non-invasive. So it is good when packages are stolen or when something really happens on the block, but just for, oh, I want the footage from this date just because they can't get it. So I've done it. I think it's worth getting some money back for your own safety and security. But it's nice to know that you do not have a hard line to MPD and they cannot take the footage whenever they want.
Yeah. And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, I personally have had. What does happen? The detectives do knock on your door and they ask you for the footage, and find out a little bit more what's going on and decide. And I've had people ask for footage for drug dealing, and I've been quite clear with the detective. I think it's a public health problem, and they were like, "Fine, it's okay, no worries." And that felt good. Feels good to own our data.
Or technology malfunction. Oops, the camera didn't record that time. Sorry.
If it comes to that, sure. I'd rather be honest as much as I can, but thankfully, and I felt like I could. The detective was respectful of my choice.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic, and I wonder too. I don't know. I would love to just talk to more people about it, and I think that I mean, the thing that really honestly kills me about it is that Amazon managed to monetize the fact that their packages were getting stolen and they had to replace them. And then they turned that into a product that they sold people like that. I'm just like, way to go, Amazon. I am curious about these, the package lockers, because I feel like there's other ways to address the package issue in particular. But anyway, I know we don't have a ton of time right now. I would love to talk about it more, and it could be cool, to have a little FAQ or some kind of resource about it, things to consider, not to tell people you have to do this or that or whatever, but just things to weigh and consider.
Yeah, I'd love to support that, Emily. And if there's a room for some deeper conversations and drafting of that with your organization and another refrigerator magnet, that'd be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be great because I think the default in working with our liaison from the mayor's office, who's really lovely, but it's here's a postcard to give to neighbors that they should get this and they'll get this money back. And there isn't that opportunity to kind of question and understand the broader infrastructure there as well. And then it sounds like one follow-up could be just digging in on that. And then Bob, really appreciated your comment about prior resolution work. And so as an ANC, we don't meet in December, but we do meet in January. And Kent seemed really, our chair seemed really open last week to entertaining a resolution coming out of this committee. So we can definitely work on that.
Okay. And what's a good next step for that? I just don't know how it works. Bob, I should follow up with you.
Yeah, myself and Layla, I think the both of us on an email, I think would be the best next step.
Okay.
Who on the council are pretty supportive of this? And is there a chance of getting more support from other members?
I think so. Grasso has been the most supportive from the get-go. Alan has been open and agreeing it's important, but not necessarily rah, I'm about to introduce this or have a hearing. But I think we're hopeful that in the new session, maybe it will be prioritized more. And then, it was interesting when we had the amendment on the stingrays on the cell site simulators, just to see who supported that, because we hadn't done a lot of groundwork on it. And it was Councilmember Pinto, Robert White, Trayon White, Grasso, and one other person. And a few other people voiced, general concerns or interest, but we're not prepared to vote on it. We have talked with Nadeau's office, and I think they're not going to be she's not going to be leading the charge, but I don't know. I don't know
I-
how much I'm supposed to share, but I think
No,
that,
that's fine.
yeah.
I think I think there's 7 votes on the council, if not 9 votes on the council for this. But at the end of the day, as long as the executive has a take on policing as Muriel Bowser does, they're going to continue to use all of the tactics and tools at the disposal of the police. And that's what we're seeing. I think we're having a divided council, legislative from the executive. And we got to start thinking as a community, come 2 years from now, if Muriel Bowser runs again, we need, to be political to defeat her. And if she doesn't run, we need to try to find amongst ourselves people who are like-minded on this. Who are we going to run? Because it's so vital to have the executive in the city, any city, I guess.
Yeah, that's really helpful, like context. I would say, I think we're optimistic about it getting introduced next year, I would say, in terms of passing medium.
Sure.
But we're doing a lot of this outreach to try to get more community support and engagement on the issue.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of support in 1A as well as Ward 1, I think. Cool. Anybody else? Otherwise, I think I'm good. That was great.
I just want to remind people, so it's incorrect on the ANC 1A website. So we're not meeting in December, and hope everybody is able to take some time for themselves or family or friends and just rest. But obviously you can still reach me or Bob on email, and then we'll meet January 21st. That's the day after inauguration at 7. And I am trying to revive the Google group because I think that will be an easier way to keep members engaged as we start our new year together. So I think I've added everybody to that. Emily, I don't know if I added you actually yet. I added Emma. If you have a Gmail that I can use, that's great.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think you
I
can
will
still
send it to you.
access, you can still read it without, oh, perfect.
There's an L after
great.
the Emily, like people miss it all the time.
Got it. Thank you all so much.
Very
Anything else?
interesting.
I would just love to say thank you. It's really fun to be here and also to see that it's cool to have this more informal setting and just hear from you all. And yeah, I'm excited to come to the next meeting and keep talking about this surveillance stuff, but also just talk about all these broader public safety, policing, et cetera, issues with you also.
It's very
Thanks for
helpful.
having me. And maybe see you around the
Great.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys later.
All right. Take care.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Bye, guys.